now, this brings us to the return of the living dead.
Now, that was all the candidates I could find for this little bachelor's game, but it's unlikely that this would change the outcome of Russia's destiny. Now, regardless of bride, the new czar would be destined to only have two children. Just speculation, though. A daughter and then a son. The names are optional here just for the sake of it. The Tsar would declare his son to rule next, while his daughter to rule only if there is no male heir. My guess is the princess would be born in 2019 and live for 88 years, which means she would die in 2107. Her brother, the prince, would be born most likely in 2021, and he would live up to 40 years, in which he will die in 2061. So if the Tsar did abdicate, then his son would only be Tsar for 3 years. So you're wondering who would sit upon the throne then? According to calculations, the second Tsar would indeed have an heir of his own, and thus it's his child that would take the throne rather than just having his father return to power or his sister or her children to replace him. Now, the second Tsar would only have one child, and it would be the Avatar's granddaughter, who would be born no sooner than 2046, which means she would inherit the throne at age 15. So the entire Russian Empire would fall into the hands of a teenage girl in high school. Some people would protest against this, especially since her grandfather would have instated a rule which prohibits someone from becoming Tsar/Tsarina until they reach the age of 16, or perhaps their early 20s. Who the fuck knows? The Avatar would either allow her aunt to reign as acting Tsarina or reinsert himself on the throne. My guess is that he would give his daughter the crown, even though it would only last for a year, but some people would prefer the aunt to stay as Tsarina until her niece finished college. In this case, the substitute Tsarina would rule Russia for 7 years, unless people would prefer for the niece to get married first and then take over. This would add an additional 2 years to her aunt's reign, for she wouldn't get married until 2070 the soonest. On a side note, this would mark the 100th anniversary of her great-great-grandparents' own wedding back in 1970. Once she has married, then her grandfather would force her aunt to step down in her favor, and by this time, he would be in really poor health, since he's only got 1 decade of life left to live. This would cause a succession dispute because his other grandchildren could contest the rule of succession once he dies, because when it comes to household/family matters, it's the Avatar who makes the final decision. Despite the second Tsar's daughter being the Tsarina, her aunt would become head of the family upon her father's death, and she would make the final household decisions. Speaking of passing the torch, 2061 and 2080 would be horrible years in Russian history because those were the years that Russia's first 2 monarchs in a century have died, and the 2080s in particular would be considered the dark decade for Russia. The second/current Tsarina would rule until her abdication in 2098 or her death in 2142. But either way, she would be the last monarch to rule 21st century Russia. In fact, Russia would experience a national holiday which becomes an over-the-top festival in 2093. This is because 2093 marks the 100th anniversary of the Avatar's reincarnation. Assuming the second Tsarina would abdicate, she would be succeeded by her son, who was born in 2071, and so now we have a 28-year-old ruling Russia until his death in 2148. He would have 2 children ready to succeed him, a son and a daughter, his son being born in 2101 and his daughter in 2105, which makes her birth a big occasion. The reason being is 2105 is the 200th anniversary of the start of the royal family's bloodline for her 5th time's great-grandfather, the Avatar's great-grandfather, was born in 1905, and the family's ancestry can't be traced further than that. So anyway, her older brother then becomes Tsar upon their father's death at the age of 37. But his reign would only last 12 years, for he would die in 2160 at age 49. This is just remarkable, for it would be 99 years since the death of the Avatar's son. Now, the fourth Tsar would have two kids of his own, but both are daughters, and only the latter survived infancy. And the problem is history is repeating itself, for his only daughter would only be 12. So her aunt becomes Tsarina for the next decade, from 2160 to 2170, which is another marked anniversary, for once her niece inherits the throne in 2170, it would be 100 years since the coronation of the second Tsarina. The third Tsarina would die in 2207, while the fourth Tsarina dies in 2244. Now, the main line becomes extinct right here, for the fourth Tsarina never had any children for some reason, and 2244 would be remembered as the year a family's legacy died. Rip Anastasia's retribution, 1993 to 2244, or 1905 to 2244, if we're counting by blood.
Alright, now we're once again at the end of the video. Pretty interesting stuff so far. Can't wait to see how everything turns out in part 5. And I hope I've answered certain questions of yours, Leo. I don't plan to disappoint you in any way, or the rest of you for that matter. Now, I have to take a break with Codename Altair for the meanwhile. For part 5, it's not going to be released for a little while. Well, the next video to be released will be part 3 of episode 1, Project Y, of Codename Deneb. It's time we brought that show back from the grave.
Or that's what I would say if we already haven't.
And then after that is going to be a special project with a certain introduction from a very famous celebrity. We all hope to see you all there. Bye-bye.
Ah yes, there is one thing I forgot. Hope is such a splendid thing.
I'd buy that for $1.